Hey there, everybody. I'm Dee, and I'm your humble host. I'm going to be here every Friday to tell you stories about the paranormal and all things spooky. So if you're ready for a weekly story about things that can chill your blood or keep most people up at night, stay tuned because we're about to dig deep. This week I'm going to tell you about the haunting of Alma Fielding, but before we go into it, allow me to paint you a picture. The year is 1938, in a district of Greater London called Thornton Heath, which is located just north of the town of Croydon. Back then, it was known to many Britons had turned to spiritualism back around the 20s and 30s due to the losses of the Great War. A number of them were turning to it for fear of conflict of things to come. In a way, spiritual seances offered a sense of wonder and intimacy that they rarely found in the Church of England. Now that we've got a bit of background information to our macabre story, how about we jump into what we really came here to see? Alma Fielding was described as an attractive, pretty well-off 34-year-old housewife. She lived with her husband Les and their teenage son Don. They also had a lodger living in their house named George. I don't know why that was compelling to include, but that's what happened. And one evening, when Alma was in bed, she had been afflicted with some severe kidney pains, and her husband Les was also laying beside her, suffering with some tooth problems. And as they were laying there, it said that Les and Alma were attacked by a flying eiderdown, which, if you don't know what that is, an eiderdown is a duvet or comforter filled with the breast feathers of an eider duck, a female eider duck, to be exact. Why it can't be male? Maybe it's just softer that way. Soon after, it said that the couple had looked at a mirror in their room and reported that they had seen a six-figured handprint that had appeared out of nowhere. Alma reported that glasses would fly through the bedroom that she shared with her husband, and at one point Don, her son, had come in to find out what the commotion was and had to dodge past a pot of face cream. It was at that point that Alma had decided to go to the press, complaining about a poltergeist that had been invading her home. She would have gone to the police, but, could you imagine being a police officer and having some frantic lady come in and go, "I've got a spirit terrorizing my house"? They probably would have turned her away, and they probably would have laughed at her, or they would have just ignored it and kept on with their business. So instead, Alma called a press company called the Sunday Pictorial, and we're telling them about her experiences. And you see, the Sunday Pictorial had a portion where they allowed the residents to call them and report their spiritual happenings to kind of get that out there. Some would get published. It all depended on the credibility of the story. Of course, you wouldn't want something that seemed so out of, reach and whatnot to come in. Now, a man by the name of, and I'm probably going to butcher this, I apologize, Nander Fedor, who it turns out was a Jewish Hungarian immigrant. And that's not me saying anything, that's probably where the name came from. I'm trying not to butcher it. He was an investigator of the International Institute of Physical Research and had learned about Alma's events through a pal who just happened to be a clergyman. Because randomly people have friends like that. I'm sure not a big deal. Fedor was said to be a kind-hearted man, choosing to seek out the goodness even within the biggest frauds. However, Fedor had also been accused of being a cynic about the supernatural and unkind to mediums by the physical press and sued for libel. I'm not exactly sure. I really should have done better research on words that I didn't understand, but didn't really think that far ahead. Upon hearing about Alma's paranormal events, Fedor wanted to prove that he was a sincere believer in spiritualism and a psychic phenomenon. In the course of several months, Fedor would investigate the phenomena and Alma's relationship to it. He felt that clearly Alma had been the target from the start. Couldn't have been Les or Don or George, it had to be Alma. Alma's haunting came as the shadow of war, which haunted even the most ordinary people. Some people were able to cope, while others, well, not so much. Alma's husband Les would often wake up from nightmares from his participation in the Great War, which nowadays he'd probably get diagnosed with PTSD. But who am I to judge? Fedor would later become obsessed with this case, to the point that it threatened his career and was beginning to put Alma over the edge. There was evidence in his notes that revealed that Fedor's obsession had taken an almost creepily physical property. So, he was, really into this. The way some people really get into other weird stuff. And he was just so obsessed with, making it his goal to prove that she was right. That this was all true, because, of course, if she was true, then he was obviously completely able to lose that, or to keep that credibility that he'd always have, but the accusations would have gone away. Or at least lessened. People would have thought him better, somehow. Fedor's job was to investigate and find that Alma was a fraud. However, he was determined to find Alma's experiences to be genuine evidence of the supernatural. Before she would make appearances at the International Institute of Physical Research, she would have to be undressed and examined in almost every orifice. Not just look at it. They went in pretty deep to find stuff. Why, you ask? Well, because the Institute kind of believed that Alma was hiding trinkets up in her, for increased modesty, her lady bits, her vaginal orifices, and was then shooting them out with some sort of muscle spasm. Seriously, what? Shockingly enough, Fedor did finally admit that there were parts of Alma's claims that seemed to be completely far-fetched and untrue. However, he believed that Alma was not a complete liar. She wasn't a total fraud. But she was just a little fraud, just a little bit. Not a huge deal. As the investigation went on, Fedor went from believing that Alma was being possessed to believing that she was being subject to forces unleashed by repressed trauma, even possible sexual trauma. So, she's not being haunted, she's just crazy because she's having some trauma issues. Could be because, you're checking her orifices. Her poltergeist became less of a source of wonder and more to a case of sickness. Mental health, hello! But that wasn't a thing in the 30s. Not as big as it is now. They wouldn't have really dug too deep. Especially for women. Gotta have that suffragette. To be honest, though, the research I did, it isn't exactly clear whether or not anyone has ever made any conclusions as to whether the haunting of Alma Fielding was all about. However, there does appear to be evidence that there was so much anxiety from Fedor and Alma herself, and longing to believe that he was right, that something was happening and anything could have become believable. Not necessarily that it is, but, some paranormal forces are stranger than most, and we're not here to judge. I'm just here to report. And that, my dears, is our paranormal tale for the week. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. And I want to make sure that you guys know I have linked my sources below, so that way you know that I'm not, pulling stuff out of my butt. I did change some things, paraphrasing happens a lot. And I hope to see you guys next week. But until then, I'm Dee, and remember, just because you can't see it or explain it doesn't mean it isn't real. Good night, and have some spooky dreams.